What if I told you that deep in Nazi Germany, in early 1943, spy masters were reading reports so extraordinary that they shook their belief in victory? How could a single factory in Michigan, in a land far from the front lines, produce one of the biggest, most advanced heavy bombers of the war every hour? Could an assembly line built for cars really outpace all war machines Germany was forging? And if that was true, what did it mean for the Reich's fate, for the people at its highest command, and for the war itself? Imagine Wilhelm Canaris, head of the Abwehr, Germany's military intelligence, poring over intercepted production figures, diplomatic dispatches, and industrial observations. Day after day, he sees numbers, thousands of workers, massive aluminum consumption, hundreds of parts, enormous factory floor space. He sends summaries to Berlin. Göring laughs. Hitler says it's exaggeration. Speer reads, grows pale. Because the truth is not just a matter of numbers, it is the mathematical doom of an industrial war. This is the true story of how the Willow Run bomber plant, Albert Kahn's towering factory, Ford's assembly line revolution, and the Abwehr's intelligence combined to shape the turning point of World War II. Before we continue the story, please do a little thing. Click the subscribe button so your next generation can also know this story. If you already subscribed, thank you so much.
In the spring of 1941, even before the United States officially entered World War II, a visionary industrial project was underway. Ford Motor Company, under the leadership of Henry Ford's son Edsel and engineer Charles Cast Iron Charlie Sorensen, was commissioned to build a massive new factory in Michigan to produce B-24 Liberator heavy bombers. This was no small undertaking. The B-24, designed by Consolidated Aircraft, was enormously complex. Thousands of components, hundreds of thousands of rivets, massive wings, 4 engines, a bomb bay that could carry several tons. For traditional airplane factories, output was limited by craftsmanship, by tooling, by the need for careful calibration. For critics, the idea of producing such machines with the speed and scale of an automobile line seemed fanciful. But Ford, commanded by government contracts and spurred by the idea of the arsenal of democracy, believed automotive mass production techniques could be adapted. They hired Albert Kahn, the industrial architect famous for designing enormous efficient structures, to design the Willow Run facility. The building itself would be colossal, one of the largest under a single roof, designed with long assembly lines, tooling facilities, stamping shops, and huge staging grounds. Construction began in earnest. The site outside Ypsilanti near Detroit was cleared, graded, timber used, steel delivered, concrete poured. By late 1942, the plant was largely finished. By then, Ford was already doing part subassemblies and starting full assembly of B-24s. The civilian car assembly mindset, specialization of tasks, moving assemblies instead of workers moving around big components, was adapted to aero industry demands. But early challenges were many: design changes from the military, supply chain shortages, labor issues, tooling delays. Meanwhile, overseas, Germany was fighting on multiple fronts: Russia, Africa, the Atlantic. The Nazi leadership had intelligence services. The Abwehr, headed by Admiral Wilhelm Canaris, collected reports about enemy industrial capacity. It was known that the U.S. auto industry was enormous, but converting that capacity to warplanes of high complexity and at such scale seemed almost unbelievable to many in German high command. By early 1943, Willow Run's output was increasing. Hundreds of workers, many of them women, many from diverse backgrounds, labored in shifts. Ford's organizational efficiencies improved. Costs per bomber dropped. The bomber an hour goal, at first a bold target, began to seem within reach. To Germany's spy masters, information filtered in, shipments of aluminum, tooling contracts, contracts with engine manufacturers, for example, Pratt & Whitney, photos of aerial manufacturing works, accounts from neutral observers or foreign business contacts. Canaris, tasked with assessing enemy capability, saw data that seemed to confirm one thing. America was not just being mobilized, it was outproducing expectations. The gap in industrial power was not marginal, it was yawning. This intelligence, however, would clash with ideology, denial, and belief.
If intelligence reports had wings, by early 1943 they might have carried in their cargo the certitude that Germany was slowly and inexorably losing the war. But reports need trust, they need interpretation, they need to penetrate the mindsets of those in power. For Canaris and his Abwehr, the reports were clear. Willow Run's planned capacity was enormous. Its workforce was massive. Its assembly line methods were accelerating. But when these findings were delivered to Hitler, Göring, and their inner circle, something dangerous happened. Not a correction of policy, but dismissals, mockery, and ideological resistance. Many in Hitler's inner circle simply refused to accept that a country built in the image of industrial discipline and authoritarian order could be outmatched by what they considered a democratic, disorganized society. The idea that Ford, once so ridiculed for treating workers as interchangeable parts, could now build bombers faster than German factories built tanks was nearly heretical. Göring, the Minister of Aviation, is reported in similar narratives to have laughed when told about 1 plane an hour from Willow Run. Others claimed it was exaggerated, propaganda, impossible to sustain. Yet behind closed doors, Albert Speer, Germany's Minister of Armaments, understood the threat. Speer's own diary and academic treatments show that he recognized industrial capacity as destiny in this war. Every new bomber America could build meant more bombs over Germany, more pressure on German supply lines, more losses in daylight bombing raids by the U.S. 8th and 15th Air Forces. But Speer was hamstrung by Hitler's disbelief, by bureaucratic inertia, by shortages of materials like aluminum, oil, and manpower. Canaris's intelligence operation had its own limits, occasional delays and distortions in reports, difficulty verifying numbers, and the problem that Hitler often dismissed reports that contradicted his worldview. But despite that, by mid-1943, evidence was overwhelming. The U.S. was building more warplanes per month than Germany could hope to match, and Willow Run was a symbol, not just of capacity, but of a new kind of war, industrial war, waged far from the front lines. There is no clear archival document that says, on March 17, 1943, Canaris formally told Hitler that Ford is making a bomber every hour, and Hitler admitted defeat. That dramatic moment seems more an interpretive construction than a single documented encounter. But there are many reports and data points from this period that strongly suggest Germany's intelligence services had already understood the scale of U.S. production and that it deeply unsettled parts of Nazi leadership. One key metric: by late 1943 and into 1944, Willow Run's monthly output was reaching into the 300-400 aircraft range. In August 1944, for example, the plant produced 428 B-24s in that month. The cost per aircraft declined due to economies of scale, improved tooling, more stable supply. Meanwhile, Germany was suffering from Allied bombing of its factories, depletion of fuel, increasing turn in the war on the Eastern Front, and shifting priorities. Daylight bombing raids, especially during Big Week, February 1944, proved that air superiority depended not just on fighter tactics or pilot bravery, but on raw numbers. More bombers, more missions, more bombs. The Abwehr knew it, Speer knew it, even Göring had to acknowledge at some level that America's industrial math was winning.
But Hitler rarely changed course even when confronted with such data, especially if it crossed into political or ideological territory. So, in 1943, while there might not have been a single turning point meeting with the Führer acquiescing, there was a turning point in German awareness. Canaris could see defeat in production curves, in the swelling numbers of B-24s, in the way each Allied bomber coming over Germany was not just destroying a factory, but also confirming a calculated prediction made in Michigan, in Kahn's design, in Ford's diffusion of methods. The war wasn't lost yet, but from that moment onward, the margin of defeat was being drawn in pencil, in engineering prints, in output reports, in American factories running day and night.
With Germany's intelligence services increasingly aware of U.S. industrial mass, the Allies began to turn those numbers into strategy. The Willow Run plant was not just a factory, it was a keystone in the combined Allied plan of strategic bombing, logistical sustainment, and overwhelming force. From mid-1943 onward, daylight bombing raids became more frequent and more daring. The 8th Air Force of the U.S. Army Air Forces, aided by long-range escorts later in the war, struck at German aircraft factories, fuel depots, transportation networks, and infrastructure. The rationale was clear: reduce the enemy's ability to wage war industrially. Each loss inflicted by bombing reduced Germany's capacity to keep up. Every new B-24 built at Willow Run meant another machine to deliver bombs, to support invasions, to threaten German territory from the air. The math added up. Albert Speer, struggling with shortages and with Hitler's priorities, began to plan for how to manage Germany's waning resources. He tried reallocating labor, moving production underground, dispersing factories, but these were stopgap measures. The momentum belonged to the Allies. The figures reported by the U.S. War Department and by Ford showed that Willow Run alone would produce thousands of bombers over 1943 to 45. Indeed, the total number built at Willow Run before the war's end was about 8,600 to 8,700 B-24s, including finished aircraft and knockdown kits shipped for assembly by other plants. Thus, Germany's strategic decisions became reactive. German anti-aircraft defenses and fighter production were ramped, but too late, and always under strain from material shortages and aerial attacks destroying production facilities. Meanwhile, the Allies' bombing campaigns, especially during Big Week in early 1944, exposed to the world and to German planners that intelligence was not exaggerating. The skies over Germany were becoming contested airspace, increasingly disadvantageous for Luftwaffe. Each daylight raid was both punishment and proof. By the time Germany attempted countermeasures more aggressively, camouflaging factories, shifting production underground, deploying more fighter aircraft, it was in a weakening position. The industrial math that Canaris had seen years earlier was now manifesting in ruin. Lost territory, lost fuel, lost manpower. Germany's war production, though still formidable, could not match the combined output of the U.S., with Britain, Canada, Australia, which now had multiple aircraft plants, many of them modeled or inspired by the mass production methods of Willow Run. In the end, the plant's capacity, that one bomber an hour mark, was not just a slogan, but a reality during its peak. Ford achieved rates which meant next-generation designs, logistics, and bombing strategies could be filled with material. Germany could no longer fight only with quality and doctrine. It needed numbers, and didn't have them. Thus, the truth Canaris uncovered in 1943
and that Hitler refused to accept, was this: war isn't won only on the battlefield. In modern war, it is won in the factory, in the supply chain, in the ability to turn raw materials and labor into machines. Willow Run had shown what was possible, and for Germany, understanding that truth too late sealed its fate.